I'm happy to see all of you here. And this week we're going to talk a little bit about right livelihood. And of course, we all have livelihood. Even if we don't have paid work, we still have a way of receiving our requisites for living. And that's our livelihood. The Buddha even mentioned the livelihood of an infant one time, receiving mother's milk. And so it's important to think about how we receive our basic requisites and other things. You know, the basic ones are, of course, food, clothing, shelter, and medical attention. And those are considered the requisites, the required things. But most of us, when we think about livelihood, we think about the work that we've picked up to do, and we need to consider all of that. So when the Buddha talked, I was always kind of intrigued, impressed by the fact that that livelihood is one of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, because it is such an important part of our life. You know, we spend an enormous amount of time doing the things that we need to do to have, our basic needs met, to be able to have those requisites and other things for living. And because we spend a lot of time on it, it really is a training. Whatever it is that we are doing, we're training the mind, and we're developing, and the way in which we approach our work is a training for the mind. So the Buddha gave some ideas about things that we should not pursue as work. And in particular, there's a short sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses, in the Book of Fives. So it's 5 trades, 5 kind of businesses we should not engage in. He said, don't trade in weapons, or don't trade in living beings. Don't trade in intoxicants. Don't trade in poisons, and don't trade in meat. So you get a sense, really, we want to make sure that whatever our livelihood is, we can keep the 5 precepts. So not killing, not stealing, not lying, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not having, ourselves using intoxicants, but also not encouraging others in any of these fields. Now, of course, this affects a lot of people's livelihood, especially if your livelihood is fishing or farming. And I find a couple of things in the suttas that are a bit interesting. In one place, and also in the Numerical Discourses, in the Book of Sixes, number 18, the Buddha talks about how one who kills animals for their livelihood doesn't really prosper. And he sees a fish dealer killing fish and selling them by the side of the road. And he leaves the road and sits down, and he says to the monks who are with him, have you ever seen or heard of a fish dealer killing fish and selling them, that by that work and livelihood accumulates and enjoys wealth? And they said no. And he said he had never seen that either. And he said it's because when the person is slaughtering the fish, they look upon the fish with cruelty. And he says then the same thing about butchering cattle, and killing the cows and selling them, or sheep or pigs or poultry or deer, any kind of killing of animals and selling them. And what's interesting about it is that he's talking about the mental state. And this is, of course, it's also about the suffering that we may put other living beings through. So in thinking about all different kinds of livelihood, work, activities, even, hobbies or whatever we might engage in, does it involve causing suffering for other living beings? This kind of extreme suffering. There's no way to stop causing suffering at some level. Small beings die when we walk across the street. We have no intention of harming. But if we're engaged in an activity that actually causes harm to living beings, on a regular, that it's part of the activity, that's something we should pull away from, because there has to be some level of disregard in us or some level of cruelty. So we want that to be purified from the mind, and we want our conduct to be purified also. And another little side note on that is that the Buddha also talks in another sutta. It's also in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's in the Book of Eights, number 54. He talks about how to really be successful, do things that are for one's welfare and happiness, how to lead your lives for the welfare of and happiness. In fact, the question that he's answering in this sutta is, how can we lead our lives for our welfare and happiness in this life and in future lives? And the Buddha says, and of course, a lot of this has to do with our work. He says accomplishment in initiative, protection, good friendship, and balanced finances are how how this is what leads to welfare and happiness in this life and future lives. Or he said, well, this is in this life at least. And he says, if a person earns a living by means of farming, trade, that kind of business, raising cattle, archery, government service, or one of the professions. Now, this is interesting, because how can archery not harm? What about raising cattle? So the raising of the cattle is clearly different from the slaughtering of the cattle. If you understand how to go about these things, in order to complete and organize the work, this is the accomplishment of initiative. And protection, when he talks about protection, he talks about protecting your wealth from, is it rulers, government rulers, bandits, fire, flood, and ungrateful heirs or unbeloved heirs. In other words, selfish family members. And this is interesting how the Buddha covers this kind of thing. The accomplishment of good friendship means you really seek out the people, whether they're young or old, that are mature in conduct, accomplished in faith, ethics, generosity, and wisdom, and you associate with them. You talk with them and you engage in discussion. And then you also emulate that kind of faith, ethics, generosity, and wisdom. And then when he talks about balanced finances, he says we should know what one knows their income and expenditure. They balance their finances. They're neither too extravagant nor too frugal. And in this way, the income exceeds what they spend and not the other way around. And he gives a simile of someone who has scales and they know that it's low by this much or high by this much when you're looking at a scale. And that's the way we have to pay attention to what we have, to our money. And it says that if someone has little income, but they spend a lot, it says people would say that person eats their wealth like a fig eater, kind of like you just blow through it. But if you have a lot of money and you live a very stark Spartan life, then they say that person will even starve themselves to death. So like they're so miserly. And he says that neither of those is good. And then he talks about some things that cause us to drain our wealth and our resources. And it has to do with, well, the quote here is womanizing, drinking, gambling, and having bad friends, bad companions. It's like a reservoir with 4 large inlets and 4 drains. And someone opens all the drains and closes off the inlets, and you just lose what you have. And of course, this is true spiritually too. And then the opposite, if you don't do any of those things and you have good friends, then it's like you're opening the inlets and you're closing off the drains. So that leads to happiness in this life. What leads to happiness in the future life? Accomplishment in faith, ethics, generosity, and wisdom. And he talks about those a bit too. And I think you kind of know how that works. And what's interesting about it is that all of those things that help us be happy in future lives, we can also use and develop in our work life, in our livelihood. And then, thinking in terms of livelihood as, a real ground for practice, we can even think about, the livelihood of the monastic. The Buddha, see if I can find the quote here. I have it in my notes. The Buddha talked about the monastic also, that wrong livelihood for a monastic, for a monk or a nun, which you can we don't handle money, but there still can be scheming, hinting, belittling, pursuing gain with gain, he says. This is wrong livelihood. Any kind of livelihood that encourages or requires deceiving someone or kind of getting them to believe something, convincing them of something that's not for their well-being, all of these kinds of things. And when we get down to real examples, oftentimes people have asked me about situations with regards to work. Like they'll work for a company that's not particularly ethical, and then what should one do? And when they're asked or required to do something that's unethical, how do they handle it? And of course, situation by situation, you need to address, like how to work with these things. What's the right thing to do? Keeping in mind that the purity of our actions and the purity of our mind is way more important than how much money and physical security we have. Because that whole idea of, what happens with regard to our spiritual development, that's the long-term view. And we're not really going to be happy in this life, no matter how much money we have, if we don't have that kind of purity of mind that really is stable and secure. So I'm, of course, interested in hearing what you all have to say about it, and maybe experiences that you've had, things you've learned about, your own mental training through work. This is an area where maybe a person isn't doing anything that's harmful, but still you might consider, like, how does my mind get trained by this particular activity that I repeat so much? And it doesn't mean we have to stop, but at least to be aware that everything we do is a training for the mind. So I think we'll meditate now. And for about 30 minutes. So find a comfortable position. And we'll start. So sitting comfortably and allowing our mind to turn inwards. And settle on our breath. Being aware when you're breathing in and aware when you're breathing out. Following the in-breath all the way until you've fully breathed in. And then out again. Until you've exhaled completely. If you take some deeper breaths, you can feel the body let go. Feel the chemistry in your body change. And no matter what else might be happening outside or in your place, it's okay. And just accept and be aware that this is the nature of things. We don't have to be concerned or irritated. Just put our attention on our breathing and let the mind become more and more quiet. the body become more and more relaxed. And bring a sense of gratitude to this practice. For the discovery of the Dhamma, for the Buddhist teachings, and then for the fact that we've had a livelihood all these years. Food, clothing, shelter, medical support. As we're aware of our in-breath and out-breath, we can be aware of the whole body. And to begin to notice pleasant feeling in the body. And then notice the mind and any activity in the mind that we can invite to become more calm and settled, happy, at ease. And from there, just observe what arises. Allow whatever comes to pass away. And be aware of its changing nature. And encouragement to continue to be with that in-breath and out-breath at every moment. All right. Any thoughts or questions? Yes, Linda.
I wanted to ask a question, maybe a clarification on when we were talking about farming and meat and killing. So I may have misunderstood about the farming, but we human beings do need to eat. We don't necessarily need to eat animals. Um,
Yeah.
and farming, of course, goes into, how are the care of the land, the sustainability, and all of that. So there's a lot of things that we don't necessarily know about our food sources. Um,
Mm.
that thought crossed my mind. But I guess the real question I have, and for years I've wondered this, and I may just not understand it, is my understanding is that the probably the people who would say, we'll use cows as an example, the people who raise the cows for slaughter. I mean, that's the intention. And of course, the actual killing of the animal, that's clearly put in the category of wrong livelihood. And yet, as I understand it, the Thai monks eat meat. And my understanding of it is, as long as it wasn't slaughtered specifically for them, it's okay. And that
Mhm.
never set very well with me. um, so maybe I'm just misunderstanding. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's an age-old controversy. It was actually the point that Devadatta used to try to divide the Sangha at the time of the Buddha. And um, yeah, the Buddha is so precise about the nature of consciousness and how karma works. So, of course, a farmer can be um, a really good steward of the land and can care for animals, but the slaughtering itself would be, it's something that I wouldn't want to do, and I don't think you would want to do. We can see how that requires a certain hardness, and a kind of cruelty. And when I've seen it done, it's like, yeah, I mean, you can't even say I really was present for the actual slaughtering. One time, my dad had goats. Okay, so, there's nothing wrong with having animals as far as I can tell, but the Buddha said, don't trade in them. Don't make your livelihood from buying and selling them. And don't buy and sell meat or sell meat. And it's not the same. It's like that's your livelihood. But if you're purchasing meat at the store, it's just not the same karma as killing the animal and selling the meat for profit. It's just not the same. And once we had a big gathering of family, and part of our family really likes like have an open pit, roast some uh, animal's body on it. And so my dad slaughtered one of the baby goats. And all of the goats in the pen were screaming. I mean, they they have an understanding of what's going on. And the whole thing was like, I just want to be as far away from it as possible. But there's kind of a hardness um, that people develop or maintain when they're engaged in these kinds of things. And it's different from eating the meat. And basically the Buddha said, no, I'm not going to require that the monastics are vegetarian, because they're alms mendicants and they walk for their food. And if a family has made some kind of, meat stew or something, and they are putting it in their bowl, it's okay, it's okay to eat it. I realize, it's like, I think there's a development in ourselves that we can observe. The Buddha was careful, I think, to really identify what's the actual karma from these things. And he's trying to identify with the 5 precepts, the basis of what we need to make progress and to be decent human beings. And so there's a lot more we can do. Like when I became a vegetarian, this was 1981. So, it was a long time ago. I was under 30. I was 26 years old, I think, or something like that. And I didn't do it because of my concern for animals. I did it for my own health. But then soon after not eating meat, I was more and more resistant or disgusted by it. And now I'm not saying that in any way to make anybody feel bad. Everybody's bodies are different. And sometimes we need that kind of protein, and different cultures, people have had to survive on these things. But how much cruelty and disregard goes into making use of animals? I think this is really where we limit our minds with the cruelty. And so it's important not to, what I want to say, I think it's important not to be too judgmental, because that's also a limit of our mind's development and openness. We can see what's right and wrong. And I think where the Buddha drew the lines is really based on like, what's the real karmic result? And it's not a huge karmic result just eating the meat. And like you said, we can look more deeply into things, but regardless of whatever is going on with regard to other living beings, the most important thing is the state of the mind, is the purity of the mind. And we can accidentally kill, a spider while we're mopping the floor or something. But if you don't want to do that, if that's not like, you don't have the ill will in the mind, then the karma is the negative karma is not there. So I hope that makes sense. It really comes back to the mind. We might get killed by a driver doing something that they may or may not regret later. And what happens to us isn't so important, because we're going to die anyway and we'll go on. But what does matter is our purity of mind, that kindness and gentleness is there. We don't want to harm. And if that driver, I knew a pastor in my hometown who was driving, and this little girl ran out from the side of the road, and his car killed her. It must have been a horrible thing for him to deal with, but that kindness and gentleness was there, not the idea of wanting to harm. I hope that clears it up a little bit. I mean, I know people often extrapolate the first precept into, well, we shouldn't eat meat. And I think I understand why that's not where the Buddha drew the line. But we can draw the line where we find it important to draw it and possible. Some of us, for some people, I think they need some of that kind of protein. So it's like, why are we doing it? Why, if we eat meat, why are we eating it? And actually, you hear different things from different teachers. Like Ajahn Ganha, he feels like eating meat is selfish, but it's if it is from that place of just, oh, I just want this for my enjoyment, maybe that is selfish. We can look at that. But if we need it for our, health, maybe that's a different thing. And then what about, and Ajahn Chah used that that teaching the Buddha gave about the parents who are crossing the desert with their only son, and they're starving, and the son dies and they eat his meat. Don't think they kill him, but they eat his meat, and they're all the while crying, where's our son? Where's our son? And it's like, he said, you should eat, that's how you should eat food, the Buddha said. Always with like you're eating your own child. And so we can think like this. This is like putting food in its place and purifying the mind. So I heard that Ajahn Chah applied that to eating meat. Eat it like you're eating the flesh of your own child. Because after all, there is rebirth, and you don't know if someone might, that consciousness is kind of like there in that animal. Thanks for the question, Linda. Any reaction?
The answer was helpful. Yes, it was helpful. And I have a second observation about a different aspect, but I do see that there's a number of hands up. So do I have time to make one more observation, or should I?
Let's come back to you.
Okay.
You can put your hand up again.
Okay. Fair enough.
Joyce?
Well, thank you for this talk. I really did not expect to relate to it because I'm no longer working and I don't eat meat. But I ended up reflecting on some of the jobs I've had. I was in the tech field, and I was at the end of it, and most of it actually was a tech writer. And so my reflection was combined with whatever we're doing is training the mind. And that just feels so rich for me to explore, because there were very, very intense deadlines. I was the only tech writer on the team, and that's not the most highly respected position.
Yeah.
I tend to work more successfully in calm spaces, which ours was not. And so I would spend enormous numbers on my own, usually at night, the only one in the office, doing my work. But I was not in my body most of the time. I was extremely stressed. I did that for many, many years. And I know some of that was from my past conditioning, but I really see how those many, many years of working in that way has probably conditioned a lot of what I'm dealing with now. So, I don't have conclusions. I mean, I see some, kind of rough ideas of where I could explore, but I did not expect that this morning with this topic. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do you have any comments about that at all? Any kind of feedback or guidance or?
Yeah, I think in exploring it is good. Seeing what you might learn from it is good. And not spending even an iota of energy on regret.
Right.
Because we might spend a lifetime doing something and then learn from it, and never again in any future life do the same thing. I see people come into this world with a certain determination sometimes, like, I'm not gonna fall prey to that thing, and it's extraordinary. It's not ordinary. And, just not that anything you said or did that I know of was in, bad in any way, but, now, that kind of, and in fact, to also appreciate your persistence, your diligence, your willingness to make a good result. This is all useful to apply to the practice. If you can practice like that, which you can, because you already learned the skills to do that, and you have that ability, carry that on with you. So look for the good in what you're teaching the mind, and drop any of the negative or unwholesome side. And this is how we need to move on, because there is a moving on. Even if we die tonight, there's a moving on. You take all that with you. So when we make these determinations, we see through things, it helps. It really helps to guide our path.
Thank you so much for that. I have to say this one thing is I have to admit that I did hold some resentment, so I need to work on that. And I don't have regrets, at least I don't recognize them now, but I so appreciate your listing some of those things that I could now apply to the practice, because I think I avoid that because of all years of doing that. So
Yeah.
very valuable. Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah. And you've learned a lot about balance. Balance is important too, when to push and when to ease off. And, it's like driving a car. You gotta you accelerate and then you brake, and, like driving on these windy roads in the mountains, it's like, we have to pay attention to when we need to push it and when we need to back off. And, this is all part of our learning. And if we really use our experience, we can take it a long way in our practice. And also, something you mentioned about resentment. Sometimes we can have resentment, and understandably, for situations that we're in, but we should be careful to remember that we were also being paid, and we were making a living, and we had a job, and there are so many things to really remember. The good side, the side that, there are a lot of people who suffer for not having such things available to them. And so if we hold that thought, and that people may have behaved unskillfully, we may have behaved unskillfully, there's a lot of causes and conditions around those situations, and to really just learn and appreciate the good and move on and use what we've developed. Thank you for that, Joyce. Martin?
Yeah, I also want to comment on meat eating and slaughter and things like that. So I've talked to someone who is an activist, but who's been a slaughterhouse worker, and he's been telling me a bit about the conditions and that those people work. Like, most of them are illegal immigrants in the US, and they don't have any other choice. And it's extremely traumatizing to have to kill those animals and see all that blood and things like that.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. And it's really important for any of us to not have judgments about people. That's not the Buddha's point. It's not like, be down on the people who are doing that work. It's about realizing that when we can pull away from that and hold up our humanity, really continue to be affected by these things and hold up our humanity. I just heard a report that, yes, there are now the poultry plants are usually the workers are illegal immigrants. It's the one thing that why they're allowed into the country. Before that time, the workers were women. Women were the ones who got that job. And then when they moved on, were able to have other opportunities, then they wanted to like suddenly open the gates for the immigrants to come. But instead of giving them, you know, proper support and citizenship and everything, they're relegated to this kind of work. You know, it's really a hard thing. There are so many things in our society that place people in situations where they have wrong livelihood, whether it's women in the sex trade or men too, for that matter, or it's the Native Americans because they make gambling legal and all that on their reservations, and then they're forced into this kind of like livelihoods that are detrimental to their well-being. And I think as a culture, we should try to be sensitive to this and you know, do what we can to make things better.
So, and then I want to state my opinion that I think if you buy meat, you buy into the system, and you're creating some of that suffering, even if it's not intentional. And I do not agree with your previous statement that there are almost no people who need to eat animal protein. You can get basically all the protein from plants. I think the only exception to that is if you have severe allergies against soy and nuts.
Mm.
But otherwise, all proteins can be obtained from plants.
Okay, thank you for that, Martin. And I don't really know for sure myself, but I have run into people who, and I've known people who will have a very strong kind of physical, you know, it's more of a physical craving for something like fish. But it's only lasts for a short time. It's like the body gets the nutrients it needs, and then they don't eat it anymore. That would be a whole different scenario. That would really cut down on the amount of animals that would be produced and slaughtered if people were thinking in those terms. Just a thought. Thank you for your observation, Martin.
That was Martin.
Mimo?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Ayya. I was actually yesterday I dreamt about right livelihood. I don't remember the dream, but I remember that it was something related with with right livelihood. Probably my mind was already thinking about this session. And today I got this insight on. I realized that sometimes I use my work, my job, as like a shield to not be like in certain social situations, or sometimes to not do things that I don't want to do, or even to not be in touch with things with myself, or things that are happening with me. And it's been very revealing, because I mean, the last 3 months I've been in a very demanding project, a very big project that can be considered like a peak in my career. So it's been really stressful, but at the same time, I mean, the director of this project is a really good friend of mine. He's like my brother, and he was kind enough to give this project to me, because he could have given it to any other person, right? And but at the same time, I mean, at first it was like, why me? I have to do this, and it's a big responsibility and all that stuff. But then I remembered something you said. You once said that to do it as an offering to him and to everyone else who worked in this project, and even an offering to me, and even people who will watch it and enjoy it and take something out of it. And
Yes.
I realized that, I mean, through these 3 months, I'm wrapping up the project this week. So these 3 months have been like this roller coaster of emotions, feelings, and stress, and then good moments, and then bad times and stuff. But what I realized is that the worst moments came when I lost sight of that, of watching it as an offering. So it circles to what you were saying about the attitude towards the job, and all this. It's like a training. So I'm really grateful, and I wanted to bring this up because I think sometimes we get caught into the day-to-day things that are going on with the job, and oh yeah, now I'm mad at this guy who is asking for this and stuff. But the moment and I think it's really useful for anyone who wants to train their mind, the moment you go back to that mindset of, okay, this is an offering that I'm giving to them because they are also helping me, everything changes. And I mean, I always thought that the moment I got to do this type of job, it would be the most stressful time of my life. And it ended up being one of the most, one of the projects that I've enjoyed the most working on. So I think the mindset when we're working, it's really, really important. And as you said, if we can take it to our Dhamma practice, then everything balances. So thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Nemo. That's really lovely. Yes. Yes. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Paula?
Hi, everyone. Ayya. There's a couple of things I've been thinking about. I relate to what Martin was saying. I just want to go back to his just briefly, and say that there are some people who've been told that they need to eat red meat because of anemia, and whether or not that is actually true, but it has nothing to do with protein. But I agree, a lot of people feel that they need to eat meat for the protein, and that's not true. I want to bring up that given that Theravada Buddhism is goes back so far, the relevance to our current society and the way we may want to approach things, sometimes there's like a gap. And I see this specifically with my son, who is leaning and moving closer and closer very quickly towards Buddhism, but is finding a lack in the approach to the classical way. He is strongly vegan and socially responsible, and is looking for a way to combine all that. And I am also realizing that we all have this, I'm taking this class, Joyce will relate, universal need to be able to help the world. Our world is suffering from a lot of environmental and irresponsible ways of approaching it. And I recognize that I can't just focus on that need, because I probably won't be able to be successful. However, I don't want to bypass it. I want to open up to it and feel like I can do something. And without being, I'm going to try not to be egotistical about this, but I feel like there has to be sort of a middle way that we each can approach this personally. And I wanted to bring up the fact that when we talk about right livelihood, even though I'm not working anymore, my money is invested. And I have chosen to slowly change my investments to what they call environmental, social, and ESG kinds of investments, where the money, I mean, otherwise I'm supporting corporations that are polluting the earth, that are mistreating their workers, and so on. And that was a hard decision to make.
Yes.
I don't know, we'll see whether the investments are as good, but who cares? I feel in my heart better about how my money is being invested. And personally, I'm vegan, and personally, I feel better because I feel that the earth needs more vegans. We're destroying the earth with, and I certainly don't want to be harming. I feel like I don't want to be harming animals. That would make me very uncomfortable. So I feel like there's times when I feel a little frustrated with a classical approach, and I know there are some Buddhist, I don't know how to say it, places where you can actually participate with Buddhism in this kind of more environmentally social, but whether that's necessary, I don't know. I'm pretty comfortable where I am. And as you've said in the past, there's an awful lot to do just right here without going into other sects of Buddhism and moving on. But I do feel like I don't want to ignore or just go neutral on some of the things that I think need to be addressed. That's what I want to add to Right Livelihood.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. So I would say the Buddha didn't say, don't be vegetarian. I think he would totally be on board with that. And Ajahn Ganha's monastery is a vegetarian monastery, and our monastery is a vegetarian monastery. And by example, I know there are people who have become vegetarians because they've been watching me for years. They've told me that, we became vegetarian because you're vegetarian. And it's like, do it all, do it. Take care of the earth, take care of people. The Buddha's not saying don't do that. Just because that's not in the 5 precepts doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. The precepts are that basic ground level, the lowest bar to being a real human being. Yes, you can do more, but it's also to not condemn people. Help people learn, help people when they're interested, share what you know, but not I've had the experience of being around people who are kind of militant vegetarians, and I don't think it comes back to purity of the mind. Are we doing this from a place of love? Are we engaged in these things from, what it really comes back to is the Brahma Viharas. So for your son, just tell him he's got to look deeper. It's all there. That takes you all the way. But it sometimes requires a deeper excavation.
He wouldn't join a monastery because he would never eat meat. It's against his principles. So I think it's alienating.
So you're saying he wouldn't join a monastery?
Well, he wouldn't want to
join
be dependent on alms if there were meat. He would just Yeah, and maybe there'd be
But
ways
I'm
to get around
dependent on
that.
alms and I don't eat. I'm
Right.
dependent on alms and I don't eat meat. I mean,
Yeah.
he can join a vegetarian monastery.
I
He
think
could
it's
live at
more than
Ajahn
that.
Gunha's monastery.
I think it's more than that.
Yeah, of course. There's a little more
Anyway.
going on than what you eat. but
It's
just
part
let
of
him
it.
know.
I will.
There
Yeah.
are, yeah. I think it's this holding this potential and acting on our values and not condemning others for where they're at with these things, but knowing that we all make karma. We all make karma, and understanding to the degree that we can how that karma is made and what the results are. But having compassion and being supportive of the good, having compassion when we're not, doing all that we can. All right, we'll close there. Sorry, Linda, I hope you ask next time.
Yeah, no worries. And Paula touched a little bit on one of the topic I was going to raise anyway, so I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Okay, Joyce, I know you want to know who's up for their sharing. Who would like to not be included in the recording? Right, Joyce? I'm not hearing a peep. Everybody's willing to have what they've said.
Great.
Go out there.
The shares are all so superb. I'm glad to hear that.
Okay. Yeah. I really appreciate everyone's diving deep and seeing how to apply this Dhamma, because that's where the action is. That's how we're really going to realize the truth in our action, in our investigation, in our integrity and honesty with ourselves and others. So thank you all. Hope to see you next week if all goes according to plan. But we never know, do we? So I hope you're well and happy, and go with all blessings.